First off, Brady, when you heard that the rivalry between Michigan and Notre Dame was back on, what were your thoughts?
Oh, I was excited. I mean, come on, this is one of the best rivalries in college football, and for me, from playing against Michigan all 4 years, it meant something different because I was recruited by both. I almost went to Michigan, but at the last minute, I felt like Notre Dame was a better fit for what I was looking for out of my experience. So I chose Notre Dame, but I became very close at the time with Scott Loeffler. He was the quarterback coach. He was the one that was really responsible for recruiting me. Tom Herman was my area recruiter, a great guy. My family loved him, and we loved Michigan. We really did. So it was almost like every single year, besides the rivalry itself and the history between the two schools, it was also for me kind of proving to myself that I made the right decision by going to Notre Dame. Like I always felt like that was in the back of my mind.
Now, it's a very different rivalry than, say, like Michigan, Ohio State, or Notre Dame, USC. In what ways to you did it feel different as a player playing in it?
Well, I think there's a lot of respect between the two schools, and to be quite honest, they're very, very similar. And I'm not trying to say Ohio State and Michigan aren't, but typically, you grow up and you're going to one over the other. There's not too many guys who are on the fence about choosing between Michigan and Ohio State when they're trying to pick their school they want to go to. So there's that mutual level of respect. I think that's part of it. Very similar institutions in regards to how high of academic standards they hold for their student body. Then from a football standpoint, I mean, you think about all the success they've had through such a long period of time, and that plays into it as well.
It's actually, is it kind of like in a way, as one of my friends always put it, it was almost like Michigan and Notre Dame were always trying to out-tradition each other.
Yeah, that's probably one way you'd put it. Two teams that have been historically some of the most successful in college football history. They don't forget it. They don't let you forget it. So that was always on the line too. It wasn't just for the older fans that were up in the stands. It's for the generations to come to ensure that that legacy is still left.
Now, taking a look at Michigan, now that you were in a position to analyze what they've done, what do you see out of Michigan? And obviously, there's a lot of consternation when it comes to Michigan, when it's just given the last year going 8-5 in the overall. What do you see as far as just taking an
It was a step back. I mean, that's the only way to put it. Look, I think there's high expectations placed on Michigan, and rightfully so. Jim Harbaugh is a good coach. They've got a ton of talented players there, and 8-5 is not good enough. Many programs would be satisfied with that, but that's not the standard you're held to at Michigan. So they've got to figure out how to get things going again. It's going to start on offense. I think that's why you saw so many changes on their offensive staff, bringing in a guy like Ed Warner and a guy like Jim McElwain, who's always seemed to be able to get the most out of his players, whether it was at Colorado State or even for the guys he had at Florida. I mean, people tend to forget he won a couple SEC East Division titles, and it was mostly defensive led, but he also kind of got the most out of who he had there at quarterback. So I'm excited to see who's going to be the guy. In my opinion, it's probably going to be Shea Patterson. I think he's going to be the most talented passer Jim Harbaugh has had at Michigan since he's gotten there. So that should bode well for their offense and being able to open up that offense. I mean, you're only as capable as your quarterback is. Look, you've got a strong running game, right? Or at least you should with the two running backs you have coming back in Evans and Higdon. The offensive line, there's some question marks there. But I think over time they'll get that. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to rely on his recruiting and his coaching staff to be able to get those guys ready to play. Two studs on the outside, Donovan Peoples-Jones and Tariq Black. Those guys should be able to go and make some big-time plays. And then you've got a litany of tight ends, right? Probably led by Wheatley. Defense, you return 8 starters. So Don Brown should be able to, again, keep the standard that he set there and getting this team to play at a high level defensively. Whether it's with the studs they have up front, led by Gary, or the two cornerbacks, right? Lavert Hill and David Long are two of the better cornerbacks in college football, especially as a tandem. So, look, there's a lot of talent on this defense. I think this team, depending on how things go versus Notre Dame, could all of a sudden be, one of the teams we're talking about in consideration for playing in the college football playoff.
Now, I don't know how much you've gotten a chance to watch Shea Patterson during his time at Ole Miss, but assuming that you were able to, what do you see out of him as a quarterback? And one of the knocks that a lot of Michigan's rivals tend to have against him is that he played really well against teams like Tennessee Martin, but against Alabama and LSU, kind of some subpar outings. Like, what do you see out of him, both as a quarterback and what do you?
I don't know many quarterbacks that played that well against Alabama and LSU last year. I mean, maybe a guy like Deshaun Watson, right? Johnny Manziel, I think, did it one time. He got a lot of praise for that. I hope we're not making that the standard, because there's a lot of quarterbacks that are going to look bad then if that's the standard. But there is something to, I think, him having better performances versus some of the lesser opponents, and then maybe he's padding his stats. But look, the bottom line is the guy can create. He can make plays by buying time with his feet to make throws downfield. He keeps his eyes downfield, which is huge, especially when you're talking about an offensive line that could need to work on some things and is going up against one of the best defensive lines in the country in Ohio State at the end of the season. So that's going to come big time into play then. And in particular versus Notre Dame early, depending on how that all shakes out. But he can make all the throws. He's got a live arm. He's got the ability to throw with touch, but with pace. We always talk about a two ball. There's your fastball, there's your high arcing, deep ball, but there's also got to be the ball you can throw in between. And that's one that has enough zip and enough arc to get over the secondary level defenders, but in behind them and in front of the deep safety, where you can drop those throws in. He can do that. He's displayed the ability to do that at Ole Miss. So again, I think he's going to open up a lot of things for this offense this season.
Now, switching gears to your alma mater, Michigan fans probably don't have the kind of knowledge that they had about Notre Dame from a couple of years ago, because back when the rivalry was happening every year, it's been several, since 2014 now. What should Michigan fans know about what Notre Dame is good at, what maybe Notre Dame needs to work on going into the game this year?
The biggest thing they need to improve from last year is their passing game, and that is still being decided right now. There's a quarterback competition between Brandon Wimbush and Ian Book, and whoever comes out of that, there's going to be a little bit more pressure on their shoulders because Josh Adams moved on to the NFL. Dexter Williams is back, and they've got some depth there, running back, but no one with the same type of proven ability and that we've seen really do it at a high level in the backfield returning. So that's the first thing, is there's going to be more pressure on whichever quarterback that is, and the running game is not proven like it was before. McGlinchey, Nelson, their left tackle, left guard, who went both in the top 10 of this year's first round in the NFL draft, those guys are gone. So their interior offensive line should be really good. Mm-hmm. It's the edges that are more concerns, and probably more left tackle, considering that's been a cornerstone of their offensive line since McGlinchey was there, and really that left side, the blind side, with Nelson on that side too. But Hainsey will be the right tackle. He should be fine. Then Leichenberg, I think, is who's going to be slated at least now at left tackle. That could be a problem spot, right? Especially when you've got a guy like Rashawn Gary, who's on your defensive line, and Chase Winovich on the other side. It's not like you can just focus on one side. You've got two guys you have to worry about week one. Their wide receivers are going to be tough for Michigan to match up with, not so much because of speed, but because of size. Miles Boykin, 6'4", 230 pounds. Chase Claypool's about the same size. Alize Mack, their tight end, he's got a lot of size and athleticism too, like 6'5", 250 pounds. So those are tough matchups, I think, even for the best cornerbacks, because unless you're Richard Sherman and you've got that 6'2" frame and the ability to leap and still make plays on the football, it becomes tough then when you're not one of those taller, lankier cornerbacks or even safeties that's that good in coverage. So that's something that they're going to have to look out for. From the Notre Dame defense, they should be improved upon last year, even though they missed some pieces, but they've got guys like Tillery coming back on the defensive front, Dalen Hayes, who's kind of poised for a breakout year as far as rushing the passer. And you look at their secondary, a lot of depth. I mean, when you go through the two deep on their defense, a lot of experience, a lot of guys returning who are juniors and seniors, upperclassmen. So there's not going to be any gimmies. There's not going to be any busted coverages. Mike Elko left, went to Texas A&M, but Clark Lee, who was there last year as well, he's taken over as far as the defensive play calling. So they're going to be on the same page. Those guys should be a very disciplined group that they're going to have to go up against.
In that same vein that you mentioned, like Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich being a problem for whoever ends up being the left tackle for Notre Dame, what other key areas do you look at Notre Dame and saying like, wow, I don't really like this matchup for them when it comes to Michigan?
Well, I think, again, you look at some of the playmaking ability on the outside of Michigan. I don't know that anyone feels comfortable when you've got a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones with that sort of size and ability matching up against him. I mean, I think if you were going to compare the cornerbacks at Michigan right now and Notre Dame, the ones at Michigan are more proven. Don Brown's defense is more proven. So there'd be a slight edge towards Michigan if we're just being completely objective about it. That's one of the things. But it should be a really interesting matchup. It really should be. Because there's going to be growing pains that Shea Patterson goes through, right? Mm-hmm. And the entire offense goes through when you've got Warner and McElwain and different guys now calling the plays. And it's week one, so you can't really afford to make those mistakes. And Brandon Wimbush has, more experience if he ends up being the guy. And I think he will be, just because he adds that element of being able to hurt you with his legs. I know I'm not necessarily giving you an advantage for Michigan so much, but for me, I think it's a pretty even matchup. I think one thing to keep an eye on is with the youth, or I should say, an experience in the offensive line for Michigan. One of the struggles for Notre Dame last year was just getting pressure with rushing 4, and that's something I'm going to be kind of keep an eye on. Is how often Clark Lee has to bring pressure in order to get pressure on Shea Patterson, and how does that offensive line hold up in their first game with a lot of inexperienced guys working together versus that Notre Dame defensive front.
Now, last question for you, being very specific about Michigan. Michigan wins the big, fill in the blank, I should say. Michigan wins the Big Ten, goes to the college football playoff if
Shea Patterson plays the way I think he's capable of. I think if he can throw for 28 plus touchdowns, under 8 interceptions, this is going to be a really, really dangerous team. It'll be a productive offense with that sort of balance and those sorts of stats coming from your quarterback. I think they're a team that, again, because of their defense, they can always rely on that and the talent that they have on offense. If he can play that way, this could be a team that can compete for a national championship.
Excellent. Thank you, Brady.
Yeah.